Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I give you
Kong, the eighth wonder of the world!
To call Marion C. Cooper's original King Kong influential would be like saying Godzilla is just another monster. King Kong pioneered the way for countless filmmakers, countless special effects breakthroughs, and was unlike anything the world had ever seen up to that point. You gotta remember, this movie was released in 1933. That's almost 100 years ago. Sure, there were movies prior to Kong that were special effects pictures, The Lost World from 1925 being the main one, but nothing was quite like on the scale King Kong brought to the screen. Before we even get into the movie, I want to talk about the opening overture. So, if you aren't aware of what an overture is, it's basically a piece of music that plays prior to a movie's screening in theaters, back before trailers were a thing. It was to essentially set the mood. In the case of King Kong's overture, it's a nice touch, but this wasn't actually part of the original theatrical cut that was released in 1933. This was added in by Warner Brothers during their 2005 restoration of the movie. For what reason? I don't know. Mood, I guess. If for some reason you haven't already seen this or the remakes, King Kong tells the story of a filmmaker named Carl Denham who's obsessed with a place of legend called Skull Island. He basically wants to film a movie there so that he has an excuse to be the first person to ever get pictures of the island. Before he leaves, he meets Ann Darrow in a scene that's actually kinda, I don't know, creepy? It comes across as creepy by today's standards.
Hey! Taxi!
Like, if you take this out of context, I swear Anne's gonna end up on a backroom casting couch somewhere. Carl's shit-eating grin like, yeah, boy. Also aboard the ship is first mate, Jack Driscoll. One of our first introductions to him is when he accidentally decks Anne in the face, and she's like, ain't no big deal, don't worry about it. Man, the 30s were weird. Nowadays, if you fart in a person's general direction by accident 10 feet away, it's considered a microaggression, but back then, you could punch a woman in the face and she's like, don't worry about it. I mean, men, am I right? I don't know, there's something just dreamlike about a lot of the shots leading up to Skull Island. It's hard to explain, but I mean, like, the fog mixed with the black and white nature of the movie just makes it feel whimsical, almost. It's like a really weird kind of atmosphere, which is nice, because as soon as they get to the island, they say this line.
Anasawa Kong!
He says the girl there is the bride of Kong.
And all I could think to myself was, I mean, God have mercy on her if they're going to be consummating the marriage, if you know what I mean.
Booyah! Costco!
What's that?
With Costco services, you have one less thing to think about.
Something that becomes very evident once we arrive at Skull Island is just how crazy elaborate some of these sets really were. Sure, some of it was good old matte painting, but a good chunk of this stuff is real set that they built. Even by today's standards, I think it still looks pretty good, considering most movies nowadays are nothing but a green screen lot. Once Kong finally shows up, the movie kicks off. What you're seeing here is some of the earliest stop motion ever put to film, pioneered by Willis O'Brien, who also happened to do the stop motion dinosaurs in The Lost World. Sure, it lacks the smoothness and the fluidity that Ray Harryhausen would master in his movies later on, but there's an undeniable charm to the way Kong looks and moves in this movie. Something else to mention is the way you can see his fur move, where O'Brien's hands were touching to move his body. I've always loved that. And it wasn't just Kong. The movie features a bunch of other creatures, including a Brontosaurus, a Pterodactyl, Stegosaurus, the Skullcrawler, which later became the main antagonists in Kong's Skull Island, and of course, the T-Rex, in which is probably one of the most famous monster movie fights ever put to film. Would you believe me if I told you this scene that lasts barely a couple minutes took over 7 weeks to make? And my God, man. You often see this movie categorized as a horror movie, and after how horrifying the Brontosaurus scene is, could you imagine seeing that in the 30s? Jesus. And my God, man, Kong's on X Games mode with his body count. Dude doesn't know the definition of rookie numbers.
Double kill. Triple kill. Overkill. Kill-tacular. Kill-trocity.
There's even a giant animatronic head that eats people. Again, tame by today's standards, but this was almost 100 years ago. Basically, the worst audiences had dealt with as far as horror goes is Dracula. And now suddenly they've got this giant ape stomping dudes like he's having the best time of his life. And I mean, I haven't looked it up, but I can almost guarantee you this scene is probably where the inspiration from that scene in Lost World Jurassic Park came from, where the T-Rex stomps that dude to death. Eventually, Kong is captured and brought to New York, where probably the most famous movie monster climax ever takes place. Throughout the course of the movie, Kong has been simping hard for Ann Darrow.
Oh, it stinks. Nice and good.
Like, this dude is thirsty. This horny rage leads Kong to break loose from his captors and go on a rampage through New York, climbing in their windows, snatching their people up, trying to find Anne. Eventually, this leads him to the top of the Empire State Building and ultimately to his death, leading to probably one of the most famous movie lines of all time.
The airplane's got him. Oh, no. It wasn't the airplanes. It was beauty killed the beast.
It can't be denied that King Kong is a dated movie. Again, it's 100 years old. It's so old that tickets to see this thing in theaters were less than $1. Everything about it is extremely primitive, but that's a huge part of what makes Kong such an important piece of film history. I highly recommend the Blu-ray release because it's not only features the best transfer, unedited, you get the complete version of the movie, but there's a full-length 10-part documentary on there as well that shows you every little bit of history regarding King Kong, as well as a really great bit where Peter Jackson, director of the 2005 remake, takes it upon himself to completely recreate the infamous missing spider pit scene from the original movie using the exact same methods that Marion Cooper used in 1933. And my god, does it really show how hard it was to make movies back then. Because you know, if Peter Jackson, of all people, the guy who directed Lord of the Rings, is having a hard time doing the same thing that Marion Cooper did back in the 30s, respect, man, respect. Now, even I'll admit, I prefer, personally, the 2005 King Kong just because I find that one to be a lot more entertaining as a movie, but that doesn't take away from this original's impact. Watching this movie is like peering into a time capsule of the 1930s. It's like taking a step back in history and seeing the beginnings of what would become the huge blockbuster epics we have today. Without King Kong opening the door for monster movies and creating from scratch many special effect techniques that are still used today in some capacity, we probably wouldn't have Godzilla or Gamera or any of the other classic monster movies.
Play them